the Zoom app. All right, welcome to the Bay Area chapter of the Climate Reality Project and our climate justice panel on radioactive and toxic waste, racism, and rising oceans in San Francisco's Bayview and Hunters Point neighborhoods. My name is Alma Sungi Beck. 저는 백순기입니다. My heritage is Korean, and while my ancestors are indigenous to a different continent, I am here today as one of your two climate justice co-chairs and as an ally to indigenous peoples everywhere. And so I will begin our program with an acknowledgement of the land. In honor of the original peoples of this land and their generations of understanding and connection to the land, water, air, and all things alive in this place that we currently occupy, we acknowledge the Ohlone, including the Ramaytush Band of San Francisco, the Chochenyu and Karen of the East Bay, the Yokuts of the South Bay and Central Valley, the Muwekma from across the region, the coastal Miwok, Southern Pomo, Kashaya, Patwin, and Mashawal Wapo of the North Bay, and the Bay Miwok of the East Bay. We do this land acknowledgement to help remind ourselves of the oppression of indigenous people and its connection to the climate crisis. And so we can remember to follow the leadership of indigenous people, past, present, and future, as we seek and build long-term solutions to our global climate crisis. So now to the rest of our program. In these last few months, we have seen COVID-19 disproportionately hurting Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities in the United States. And we have also witnessed the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and in past years, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, and countless other Black people from state violence, giving rise to a continuing and hopefully sustained movement to fix the issues of racial injustice in our communities, especially impacting African-American people. So as I thought about this context of the current historical moment and my role as one of the climate justice co-chairs of the Climate Reality Project Bay Area chapter, I asked myself, what could I do to amplify the Black Lives Matter movement and the call for defunding the police and investing in Black communities? It didn't take me long to remember that I had heard about this campaign and this organization called Greenaction that was working on environmental justice issues in the Bayview and Hunters Point neighborhoods of San Francisco, an area that is probably less than a mile from where I live today. And so I reached out, I talked with Bradley, Dalila, and others at Greenaction, and I learned more about their campaign in the Bayview and Hunters Point to clean up the radioactive and toxic waste, as well as the challenges with the cleanup from the pressures of gentrification to build next to and on top of still contaminated areas. I also remembered what I'd learned from a friend of mine who might be on this call, who has a job as a professional climate activist, about the rising sea levels and how the Bayview and Hunters Point are among the lowest lying areas in San Francisco. I remembered also that even if all fossil fuel emission is stopped today, all of it, this minute, the temperature will continue to rise at least another 1 to 2 degrees Celsius before it starts cooling, which might be approximately 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit. This means we should expect a massive flooding problem in our lowest lying areas, such as in the Bayview and the Hunters Point. This will impact an entire neighborhood of people, homes, and communities that in 2010 was 89.3% people of color, Black, Asian, Latinx, according to the 2010 census. Plus, much of that radioactive and toxic waste that doesn't get cleaned up is going to end up in the Bay. And so in our own backyards, we have a prime example of how racism, environmental injustice, and the climate crisis are linked together and need to be thought about together and in coalition with our communities and among our organizations. And with that background, I am pleased to introduce our speakers for today. I'm going to introduce people in alphabetical order. First of all, Dalila Adolfo. Did I pronounce your name right? Okay, so can somebody pin Dalila? Oh, maybe I'll pin Dalila. Is it okay if we pin you? Okay, spotlight, here we go. There's Dalila. Dalila is a resident of East Palo Alto, California, and started organizing at the age of 12 when she joined Youth United for Community Action. Dalila was active in the campaigns that closed the Romic hazardous waste plant and in developing the community plan for future use of that site. She has worked with the California Fund for Youth Organizing and helped coordinate and strategize a way for the California Student and Youth Bill of Rights to be passed. She attended and graduated from San Francisco State University with a major in chemistry and a minor in geography and environmental studies. She is a lover of music, poetry, spoken word, lifting weights, being submerged in nature, and being with family. She was a member of Greenaction's board of directors for several years and is now the lead coordinator for the Bayview Hunters Point Community Air Monitoring Project. All right, now we're gonna put someone else on spotlight. Bradley. This is Bradley Angel, Executive Director of Greenaction for Health and Environmental Justice. In 1997, Bradley joined with grassroots, urban, rural, and indigenous community leaders from California and Arizona to form Greenaction. For over 30 years, Bradley has been a local and national leader in the environmental health and justice movement, and has helped communities win some of the most significant victories in the history of the environmental justice movements. Prior to co-founding Greenaction, Bradley was a Southwest Toxics campaigner for Greenpeace USA from 1986 to 1997. Bradley was co-director of the San Francisco Nuclear Weapons Freeze campaign in 1985 and has been active in many social justice issues since he was a teenager. Bradley was one of 5 people from around the world chosen as a recipient of the 2008 Lannan Foundation's Cultural Freedom Award in recognition of his decades of work with hundreds of diverse communities and Native nations impacted and threatened by pollution and injustice. Bradley has many, many other accolades, but for time's sake, please read it on the Greenaction website. All right, next we're gonna introduce Pam Tao Lee. Let me see if I can get Pam on. Hold on. What's up with my, there we go. I can't get Pam on as in Spotlight for some reason. I'm not exactly sure. Sorry, Pam, maybe you could speak and then we can take.
Oh, okay. Hi, everybody.
Great, so talk a little bit more and then you'll be on speaker view.
Oh, okay. I'm Pam Tao Lee.
There we go. Okay, good.
Hey.
All right, Pam, I have your introduction that you gave me. Pam Tao Lee has been active on issues of environmental justice, peace, and nuclear disarmament for close to 5 decades. She is a co-founder of the Chinese Progressive Association, was chairperson of the Bay Area Asians for Nuclear Disarmament, a contributor to the Principles of Environmental Justice in 1991, and has held leadership positions with the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice, the National Toxics Campaign, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, the Just Transition Alliance, and Grassroots Global Justice. She was active in the streets during the 2015 UN Conference of the Parties in Paris, also known as COP21, has protested against false solutions during Jerry Brown's climate talks at the 2018 Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco, at Standing Rock, and at the San Francisco Divestment and Public Bank to keep fossil fuels and uranium in the ground, and most currently is active in the development of a people's response to COVID-19 and the rush to reopen on-site schooling. Okay, so we have our 4th speaker that was slated. It was not able to make it today due to some family emergency issues. We have a possible 4th speaker. Has she shown up yet? Dr. Sumchai? Okay, so when Dr. Sumchai arrives, maybe Amelia, you could let me know and then we can do her introduction as well. Okay, Zoom polling. All right, so let's kick it off with our speakers. All right, so the first question is about setting the stage for the issues. If you could help us set, I'm gonna ask all 3 of you about this, but if you could help us set the stage for the issues, give us some background about you, about your history of involvement individually with the work and with your organizations, and any background about this particular cleanup campaign. So how about we go in alphabetical order again and start with Dalila.
Hello everyone, my name is Dalila. I got involved in environmental justice activism, as Alma said, when I was 12. I joined Youth United for Community Action in my hometown, East Palo Alto, which I do not reside anymore. I had to move to Fremont. And we had a toxic waste plant named Romic who was extremely negligent, exploded a couple times in East Palo Alto, burned workers, contaminated our groundwater, et cetera, et cetera. And during that time from 12 to 18 with Youth United for Community Action, I also met Bradley Angel with Greenaction, who was helping the Gila River tribe in Arizona actually defeat their Romic, who was arguably way worse than East Palo Alto's. And so we've known each other for quite a bit. And when I went to college, I decided to study chemistry. I think just as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, I was, wanted to know kind of what were these chemicals and how did they affect the environment and stuff like that. And during college, Bradley gave me an opportunity to be on Greenaction's board, which I served for about 4 years. And then upon graduating, I really just went back to, I really want to do EJ task force work, environmental justice task force, environmental justice work. And there was an opportunity with Greenaction. I have family in Bayview Hunters Point, so that community being cleaned up and healthy is something that I actually take really personal. And I will continue to fight for that, probably for the rest of my life. So that is me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
All right. So Bradley, why don't you go next?
All right. Hello again, everybody. And first of all, thanks to Climate Reality Project and everybody taking time tonight to talk about and learn more about this epic struggle in Bayview Hunters Point. I first started working at the invitation of residents of Bayview Hunters Point before Greenaction existed back in around 1988. And at the time, there was a hazardous waste plant proposed right nearby the community, on top of all the other pollution that community was suffering at the time, much of which they're still, some of which they're still suffering from. And back then, for example, we worked with residents to on the what at that point was the 20th anniversary of Earth Day back in 1990. And as San Francisco city officials were celebrating with polluters like PG&E out at Chrissy Field, as far from the pollution and environmental injustice as you can get from Bayview Hunters Point, we worked in Bayview Hunters Point to have the first People's Earth Day, a polluter-free, real People's Earth Day. And the struggle has really, just continued from that time and up and down. I think one of the points, and you'll hear about, we'll discuss tonight, is, Bayview Hunters, in the context of climate change and climate justice and environmental racism and systemic racism, Bayview Hunters Point does not have oil refineries. It does not have fracking or oil or gas drilling, but it's on San Francisco Bay, and the sea levels are rising due to climate change. And there's this incredibly epic problem of epic scale that we'll be talking about, of atomic bomb residue buried at the shorefront of Bayview Hunters Point at what's called Parcel E2 at the Hunters Point Shipyard. So it's become, that combined with everything else, is really the picture postcard of racism, environmental racism, injustice, and what climate justice and the struggle is about. And it really epitomizes how the local meets the global, and we're all connected in the struggle. So we'll talk a lot more about that.
So thank you, Bradley. Pam.
Hi, everybody. My name's Pam Tao Lee, and I have, maybe you can share my first slide, Delia, if it's possible, but don't worry about it. So I came to support the campaign, back in 2008. but I've been involved in this issue around atomic radioactive materials since the 1990s, when I was a participant in the First People of Color Summit. But it goes beyond that. In the early, in terms of when I was born, was the whole atomic bomb. And for me, in terms of our communities, the use of military toxics has been something very, very close to our communities since the 1940s. So I came to support the cleanup campaign again in 2008, though, when Power and Green Action reached out to us in the Chinese Progressive Association in Chinatown. And I clearly remember attending one particular meeting at City Hall where the residents and the community was asked to speak. Daya, can you go to the next slide? So I was at this meeting there to listen to Lennar and the development proposal. And because I had been long involved in the military toxics, and because the site was a former naval base, I understood exactly what the residents were experiencing and how their concerns were most likely going to be downplayed or dismissed. And I attended to support. It was a very emotional and contentious meeting. And for me personally there at City Hall, when I went up to speak, a person, which I have now since unfriended on Facebook, came up and whispered in my ear just as I was going to speak. And he said to me, "What are you doing here? You're a disgrace. And you're especially a disgrace to your own son." My son is a union construction worker. And it took me a moment to gather my thoughts while I was standing there looking at the board. And by the time I got to the mic, I was so angry that I really, really needed to call out the role of the Navy and the pollution and the creation of the deadly toxic stew that they had made, that they had brought to this pristine land with their chemicals and radioactivity. And I was angry that Lennar was putting the lives of the Bayview residents and potential construction workers like my son in danger. So I spoke there on the record that I, as a mom, would under no circumstance want my son to be working on that site. And I demanded that there be cleanup before you build up. So on the right side there is an ad that Lennar ran in news outlets all around the world. Lennar serves the gateway for Chinese home buyers. This is all around the world, and targeting people in Hong Kong, China, and here in communities around the country, and luring them to buy these homes, which were on toxic land. And on the left-hand side with the red bar is a press release that we from Chinatown wrote to the community demanding accountability around cleanup. So that's how I've related to this issue.
Okay, so we maybe stop. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that's a great introduction, Pam, to the issue of the radioactive waste in Bayview Hunters Point. So I'm going to turn back to the panel to see if there's any more that you want to say, Pam, about the radioactive waste issue. I guess we should probably share screen again.
Yes, that'd be great. You know, like I said, for me, the legacy of the radioactive waste that's there in the Bayview, and then this is where my slide, the next slide, Dalia, started back in 1949 when uranium was being extracted from the ground from Indian land. It's the next slide. On Indian land in places like Grand Junction, Colorado. This was land that was once occupied by the Southern Ute Indian tribe, and the uranium extracted from that site was used to make the atomic bombs, which was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And between 125,000 to 225,000 people were killed, and hundreds of thousands of survivors, they are called hibakusha, lived out their lives in constant pain and living in the shadow of cancer. And so it is well known that the detonating of these bombs was one of the most horrific acts of war in the history of humanity. And in this slide on the right-hand side is in 1946, the Navy detonated experimented underwater atomic bombings from ships and detonating to see if they could launch these bombs underwater. And they identified the Bikini and the Marshall Islands to experiment where that would happen. And you can see on this bottom slide there, well, first on the top is the beautiful lands of the Marshall Islands. And on the bottom there, you can see the bombs, and the Navy had 77 decommissioned battleships parked around the island. And they exploded the bombs, which destroyed the island, leaving it extremely radioactive. And the anchored bomb ships were covered with radioactive material, and they became known in the Navy as those toxic stoves. So most of the ships were deliberately sunk to the bottom of the ocean there, and a number were towed to San Francisco and docked at the now abandoned Naval Shipyard. The Navy tried to see if they could clean off. It was an experiment. Now remember, they do not know what the impact of these radioactive materials would be. So they wanted to know if they could clean off the radioactive materials with sand. And they discovered that they could not. They could not clean the radioactivity off of these battleships, and the rest is history. These toxic stoves contaminated the shipyard and the community. So that is a backdrop for how the Navy and did the toxic pollution, military toxics, and the impact it's had on the community. And I'll turn it over to Bradley and Dalio.
Okay, before we turn it over to Bradley and Dalila, Dr. Sumchai actually has joined us. So welcome, Dr. Sumchai.
Yes, it's great to be with you.
May I do your introduction from your biography?
Sure.
Let's see if I can find you. Talk a little bit more. Oh, wait. If everyone else could mute, please. And then Dr. Sumchai, if you could talk a little bit, then we can get you on the speaker.
Okay. My name is Dr. Ahimsa Sumchai, and
there we go. Found you.
I am the medical director of Golden State MD Health and Wellness in San Francisco. I'm the medical director and principal investigator for the Hunters Point Community Biomonitoring Program. I'm sorry I'm late. I attended a 2-hour meeting of the UCSF Medical Alumni Association, and I did come in time to hear the very important presentation ending that really is where I am at now. We are detecting chemicals and radionuclides of concern. We believe in the bodies of people who are living and working on and adjacent to the federal Superfund system at the Hunters Point Shipyard. That is going to be one of my contributions after 20 years of studying the shipyard and environmental health, justice, and toxicant issues in Southeast San Francisco. My perspective has expanded to recognize how enormous the shipyard is, not only because of its incredible history, but because it is a system of federal Superfund sites. The Hunters Point Shipyard had an EPA assigned hazard ranking score of 80 overall and of 100 for groundwater migration in about 1984 or so, when the EPA started looking at it as a federal Superfund site. That means that there is an 80% likelihood that the stew of toxins that are present at the shipyard, including products of nuclear fission, will come in contact with sensitive receptors, like the community that has the highest childhood population in San Francisco, like groundwater, like San Francisco Bay, to be disseminated to other communities. And that there's 100% likelihood that those sensitive receptors will come in contact with groundwater. Groundwater is one of the most common sources of arsenic exposure globally. Water contamination in general is the most common cause of arsenic contamination and exposure. And we are seeing a population of people in a cluster around the watery South Basin areas of the shipyard that are demonstrating arsenic concentrations that are toxic. They're not elevated, they are in a toxic range. And arsenic, of course, is one of the most serious quote unquote toxicants that we can come in contact with. One of the things that I wanted to say that again has blown my mind is recognizing that the Hunters Point Shipyard is so contaminated that it has spawned the birth of two little baby Superfund sites. There's a Parcel E2 landfill on the Parcel E shoreline that the EPA designated a federal Superfund site. And then the South Basin watery area flows into a channel that goes westward into the community and is within 4 blocks of 3rd Street, you know, the main drag in the community. And in 2016, the Environmental Protection Agency designated Yosemite Slough as a Superfund site. And in so doing, sued the Navy, the city and county of San Francisco, and private industry. So this is a Superfund site. It is a system of Superfund sites, and it does blow my mind perpetually to recognize that people live within half a mile to a mile of 3 designated Superfund sites. So the other thing that has been blowing my mind, Bradley, Dalila, I haven't had a chance to talk with you about it, but I have thoroughly researched the literature on human biomonitoring internationally. I discovered that in 1986, the NIEH actually funded a Superfund basic research program in which they granted monies to universities to do some select studies on Superfund contamination. And these studies were not long-term programs like what we tried to establish in Hunters Point. But what I have found is that the Hunters Point Community Biomonitoring Program is the only human biomonitoring program that appears in the world that has detected multiple potential radioactive elements in multiple screenings. The California Biomonitoring Program doesn't even test for cesium. It tests for uranium and thallium and cobalt. The National Biomonitoring Program does test for several radioactive elements, but the overwhelming majority of biomonitoring programs in this country don't even test for a battery of potential radioactive substances. So I just want to make that point to lend credibility to what we're finding here in having clusters of people who live at the historic shipyard entry going east onto Crisp Avenue with the huge campus of the United States Naval Radiological Defense Laboratories recited, and where people are working now in these buildings called FUDs that were never cleared. So the role, again, that you're playing in studying climate change and its impact on bodies of water. The Parsley shoreline at the shipyard is heavily contaminated. That's irrefutable. No one disputes that. And with the expected rise in sea levels, we can certainly expect to see migrations of these contaminants. And I believe that we're already detecting that. I believe that the South Basin cluster of screenings that we're seeing that include people who have toxic levels of arsenic in their urine is proof of that.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sumchai. Bradley and Dalila, would you like to add anything about the radioactive waste in the Bayview Hunters Point?
Yeah, why don't we cue, good to see you, Dr. Sumchai. Thanks so much for joining. I know you're busy. And maybe we can cue up the PowerPoint. And just as, and Dalila and I are going to kind of tag team on this. Dalila, maybe go to the next slide. Dalila, in fact, you want to start on that? And people can read, of course, but maybe just start with the first couple of slides.
Yeah, so as it says, Bayview Hunters Point is a predominantly community of color, from low income to middle income, mostly working class folks. And it has a history of environmental contamination on many levels. Dr. Sumchai, thank you so much for speaking on the effects of the Naval Shipyard still to this day. But Bayview Hunters Point has also had a historic issue with illegal dumping, dirty industries, industrial dumping, included with the U.S. Navy neglect. Cal Virus Screen is a state-funded tool. And if you would go on there and look up Bayview Hunters Point, it is in the 90th percentile, which means that cumulatively, it is impacted 90% more than the average of California. It is one of the most vulnerable communities in terms of pollution and environmental health and socioeconomic factors.
May you take us to the next slide? I guess I can walk through that. Yeah, we'll come back to the shipyard in a second, but there's dozens of other contamination sites, including at the adjacent India Basin, where City Hall has worked with the developer Build LLC to promote another mega development project for mostly upscale and rich people with some small percentage of so-called affordable housing on contaminated land, despite its proximity to the shipyard, have not tested for radioactive contamination. Bayview Hunters Point has the Southeast Sewage Treatment Plant. Good news is it's being upgraded. Bad news is it's still Bayview Hunters Point as the unwilling host of this treatment plant. It handles 80% of the city's sewage and sewage from other cities as well. And now why does that always have to be in Bayview Hunters Point? The community has freight transport, distribution centers, diesel trucks, heavy diesel pollution, under-regulated plants, unpermitted plants at the Port of San Francisco. It has one of the stinkiest plants of all time, a rendering plant run by Darling. The two freeways, I mentioned the India Basin mixed-use development. Maybe you can go to the next slide, Dalila. So, Dr. Sumchai talked about a lot of this, but just a little extra background and the confluence of pollution, health, justice, climate change, and gentrification. San Francisco is held up worldwide, globally, as an alleged leader in addressing climate change. We don't think much of that is accurate, because all you have to do is look at not only the Hunters Point shipyard, but I should mention Treasure Island, which is also slated for upscale mega development, where low-income people of color in subsidized housing at Treasure Island live literally with radioactive waste under their homes, with radioactive waste signs 10 feet from their back window. That's Treasure Island, and we call it Toxic Island. But at the Hunters Point Shipyard, a little history, back in 1945 to 74, it served as a naval shipyard. There was also industrial activity there. The Navy ran a secret radiological lab from 48 to 1960. And in 1989, the US government placed the shipyard on the national priorities list as a federal Superfund site. Dr. Sumchai mentioned, and Pam as well, some of that history. Probably about 10 years ago, a number of, a number of workers who worked for one of the biggest federal contractors called Tetra Tech started blowing the whistle. But City Hall didn't listen, liberal City Hall didn't listen, supposedly environmentally friendly city officials, state officials, Congress people, senators, nobody listened. Some of them might have had their hand in the cookie jar. And what is for sure known is that they were doing the bidding of Lennar, the big developer, who the city has agreed can build over 10,000 mostly luxury homes on top of and next to atomic bomb waste. And there's in addition to that epic problem, you also have the fact that Tetra Tech has now been confirmed to have committed fraud on a scale unprecedented in American cleanup history. But for years, nobody would listen to the whistleblowers. It wasn't covered in the mainstream press. I do a shout out to Carol Harvey and the Bayview newspaper. Finally, some other media started picking up the story. Back in 2016, it was so bad after government officials, including to our face, and Dr. Sumchai knows this better than I did, to all of us. Dr. Sumchai served on the Navy's Restoration Advisory Board, as did our dear friend and colleague Marie Harrison, who's a longtime community leader, Greenaction organizer, and Marie died about a year and a half ago when she couldn't breathe anymore. And she worked as a young woman at the shipyard. But the good news is there's 2 Tetra Tech supervisors in federal prison right now for the fraud. The bad news is the officials are not in prison, nor are the politicians that look the other way. So the plan is for Lennar to build this giant upscale development. Their plan, approved by City Hall all the way up to the Navy, is to leave atomic bomb waste buried at our shorefront of San Francisco Bay to create open space on top of radioactive and toxic waste, to put the so-called blue greenway on top of radioactive and toxic waste. And it's a disaster. And this is where, if you live in Bayview Hunters Point or anywhere around San Francisco Bay, people need to open their eyes. So why don't we go on, Dalila? And Dalila, you want to talk about this part? Then I can chime in. And anybody else, Ahimsa, Pam, feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, so this is, sea level rise, right? Bayview Hunters Point is on the edge of the bay. And sea level rise not only is a issue in general, but it is a huge issue and a huge issue for everyone when the waterfront has toxic and radioactive waste, other contaminations from industries and businesses in Bayview Hunters Point. And just imagine if that, that shoreline gets flooded, all of that waste will be spread throughout San Francisco. So it's not just a Bayview Hunters Point problem. It is a climate change problem. It is a San Francisco problem. It is a Bay Area problem. And we also have in Bayview Hunters Point the sewage treatment plant. There's existing residential neighborhoods. There's so many things that make this such a threat. And whoever wants to speak on it more can speak on it.
Why don't you go to the next slide too, because that we don't have to read it all, people can see, but it has If you look, it says sea level. We got a lot of our information from Bay Conservation and Development Commission, BCDC, which is a state agency. And the accepted projections are sea levels rising big time, all over, of course, all over globally, but here in San Francisco Bay and in Bayview Hunters Point. And in response to the critique of that Greenaction and others have made about the plan to leave the radioactive and toxic waste buried at the shorefront, the Navy says that, well, they're building what's called a revetment, a seawall, but even if it was 100 feet tall, which it's not, and even if it could handle storm surges, things like that, the fact is that as the sea rises, not only does it rise up top, but groundwater levels rise. Mm-hmm. And it will inundate the contamination from below at a minimum. It is a disaster that's probably started to happen already, but will be of unbelievable proportions. And what's, I'm kind of jaded and cynical, so it's no surprise to me. And, Greenaction works on these issues every day, both from an organizing perspective to the technical perspective. But the fact that, and what we really want to impart on everybody tonight, part of that is that what is City Hall thinking? Money, it's not just Donald Trump who looks at the dollar signs. It's Mayor Breed and each of the mayors before her. Former Mayor Willie Brown really helped push the Lennar development to the shipyard. And what do you know? Willie Brown then went on and continues to be involved in trying to sell investments in the shipyard. Mr. Brown, apparently, according to news reports, former Mayor Willie Brown was apparently involved, according to reports, in working to sell investments in the shipyard to overseas Chinese investors. And I think part of that reason is because even though there's been huge amount of media coverage, if you're a monolingual Chinese speaker or limited Chinese speaker, you might not see Tetra Tech committed massive fraud, that there's and we've talked to prospective buyers. Many of them are Chinese. We've talked to, they were able to get one parcel cleared as clean. And many of those new residents in the 400 townhouses at what's called Parcel A, what a surprise, are Chinese. And many, no surprise, are limited or non-English speaking. Wow. And it's broken my heart to talk to, for example, a young mom, spoke some English, and with her baby, and she was in tears because she couldn't sell the new home they invested their life savings in because banks have stopped giving mortgages, which is a good thing. They should have done that years ago. This is a disaster in every sense. Dr. Sumcha, I don't know if you'd like to add, and we can go to the next slides. And I think, why don't you keep going, Dalila? I think that speaks for itself. So Pam or Dalila or Dr. Sumcha, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so something that we haven't talked about too is the brownfields. There are so many, and brownfields are areas where there's underground storage tanks, there's underground contamination, which could be leaking, affecting the groundwater, affecting the ground. So that's also an issue in Bayview Hunters Point, that the sea level rise can also affect. Yeah, and there's plenty of at-risk sites. We've talked about this a little more already. Obviously, the Naval Shipyard, dozens of contaminated brownfield sites. We did not mention the PG&E power plant as well. There was a PG&E power plant in Bayview Hunters Point. That is something that Marie Harrison, Tessie Esther, and the community really fought for to get rid of. It is no longer there. But even that site, right, I'm sure was contaminated, and they really fought for it to be cleaned up. But you know, you never know. So
And, go ahead, Delina.
do you want to talk about the recommendations?
Okay, yeah. So, you know,
So Bradley, I'm wondering if maybe this might be a good time for us to take a break and to do
yes.
breakout groups. And then when we come back, we can talk about the recommendations, and we can talk about the ways that people can help support the campaign. How does that sound?
Wait, I think that Pam wanted to say something in here.
Oh, go ahead, Pam.
Just before I just wanted to add something in terms of current situation with the administration in February has slashed the budget for cleanup. And I just wanted to make sure that people are aware that a 27% cut has been made to the EPA, and this has a great impact in terms of cleanup, funds for cleanup, and that it's really important to understand that under this administration, it's got the worst backlog in terms of the history of Superfund cleanup in the whole history of the Superfund program. So I just wanted to end, before we go into the breakout, is right now what is going on, and the added in terms of not only holding the Tetra accountable, Lennar accountable, the military accountable, but also the administration accountable for what's going on in the Bayview. So I just wanted to end with that.
And there was actually one more question that I think is very brief answer that is just relates directly what Delila was just saying, which is, what is the platform that's being used to find the brownfields in the city, Delila?
So the brownfields, some are on Callan Virus Screen. I also know that there was a community effort, partly led by Literacy for Environmental Justice, to identify the brownfields, and a lot of community volunteers and stuff actually did some truth mapping, is what they called it. And so Literacy for Environmental Justice, they came up with a huge map with kind of all the locations of brownfield sites that they could find during that project. So.
Yeah, there's also, real quick, there's a State Department of Toxics has a website, I think Delila mentioned it, EnviroStore, but no E on the end, EnviroStore. And actually about 15 years ago, Greenaction did pretty much a landmark study called it, that you can, I don't know, it might still be on our website, but it's Googleable, a toxics inventory at Bayview Hunters Point. And there's also a US EPA report on brownfield sites in Bayview Hunters Point. There's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're just going to take a brief break from the presentation so that people can have a chance to connect in smaller breakout groups. The questions for the breakout groups, introduce yourself, maybe something about why you decided to attend the program today, maybe something you learned that was new, and any thoughts and feelings about things that you've been listening to. And then if you have any questions for the speakers, and then we're going to continue after the breakout and have them talk more, and then we'll also take questions from the audience that'll be moderated by Mary Ruth. That'll work. Okay, great. So I guess the next question really is, I thought it would be good to give Delila a chance to talk a little bit more about the air monitoring project and anything else around that kind of different, because we talked a lot about the radioactive and nuclear waste, and some about the other pollutants, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the air monitoring project and what's going on there.
Yeah, so as Alma said, I'm the lead coordinator for the Marie Harrison Bayview Air Monitoring Project. We named it after Marie in honor of her and her fight and struggle and commitment to her community. So we are installing 10 Dylos air monitors throughout Bayview Hunters Point. We have a steering committee that Dr. Himsa is a part of, with some community members and other organizations within Bayview Hunters Point. To, and their charge, was to figure out where the air monitors should go, how to divvy it up. 10 monitors isn't a lot, and we hope to get more. And we wanted to make sure that we spread it out in Bayview Hunters Point as much as possible, and really so that you can get a picture once the network is up of what the air quality is like in Bayview. Some of how this came about, the funding came from AB 617, from CARB, California Air Resources Board. And normally how the big expensive government air monitors work is that it usually takes data and measures in a really big region. Usually it's either county-wide or even statewide. And it gives you kind of an average of the air quality within the entire region. And what we really wanted to do with Bayview Hunters Point is really give it a voice through data. We feel like you don't really get a clear picture at where different communities, actual local communities are at when it comes to air quality, with air monitors that aren't necessarily localized. So we're hoping to get those air monitors up, hopefully by the end of this year, hopefully in a couple months actually. And we will be putting the air monitor network on IVAN, Bayview Hunters Point Identifying Violations Affecting Neighborhoods website. And that will be on that website, also accompanied with the IVAN platform, which allows community members to file and file complaints about any environmental issues that they're experiencing. And then I also facilitate the Environmental Justice Task Force in Bayview, which then those complaints are discussed within that group. It's also a space where community can really express, themselves in terms of their frustration. We bring together government representatives and community all in the same room. And we're also a space where people can give updates about what's going on in Bayview Hunters Point. So community can give updates, different organizations can give updates on what they're doing in events. Government agency representatives can give an update on any projects that are going on in Bayview Hunters Point, any resources. It's been a good space, especially with COVID, to share resources and different things that are going on in Bayview Hunters Point regarding to COVID. So that's kind of in a nutshell the air monitoring project, and we're really excited about it. And we hope
Can you close the windows and bring the air filter?
More funding to keep it going. This was a 2.5-year grant, and we're coming up on the end in March. So yeah, we're excited about it and excited to get the air monitors up and the network started, and the community completely owns the data to use with how they want to. And yeah.
Great, thank you, Dalila. I wanted to make sure people had heard about that and knew that that was happening.
Thank you.
And also, there's some questions, but before we get to questions, I want to make sure that we can get to the rest of the slides, Bradley's slides, and Bradley and Dalila slides around recommendations and ways that people can help the campaign.
That may help. That may answer some of the questions as well.
Okay, great. Who's gonna go?
Right. Bradley, would you like to talk?
If you're talking, you're muted. Here, I'll try to unmute you. You might need to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There you go.
So, the struggle around the shipyard has gone on for decades. But the demands have generally remained the same. But, and I mentioned earlier about the fraud that the main federal contractor, Tetra Tech, who continues to get contracts from the EPA and other government agencies around the country, including to do uranium mine assessment, contamination assessment on the Navajo Nation. Tetra Tech got a huge contract even after the fraud at Hunters Point was exposed. And it's one of the reasons that the community, including Greenaction and all our allies, residents, community-based organizations, other allies, have demanded not only do we need a better cleanup, but we need independent community oversight on the cleanup, and first and foremost, retesting the entire original shipyard site and adjacent areas, and not just like sending a golf cart with a little piece of equipment like the government did at Parcel A, where they swore they wouldn't find radioactive waste next to the new luxury homes, except they did. And then from City Hall to the feds, they didn't do any more. So we demand clean up the contamination along the waterfront and throughout the site and adjacent areas. Their plan is to do some cleanup, not do real extensive testing, certainly not with independent oversight by the community, and essentially cap it and literally put recreational areas on top of it. It is insanity. It is criminal, in our opinion. And what's really bad, I hate to say this, but certain so-called environmental groups actually think it's just fine. But they're not, they must be getting paid off or something. It's just sad. We want to, at a minimum, have a moratorium on residential and commercial development projects along the waterfront, specifically with the shipyard and Lennar's development. No one should live on top of radioactive or toxic waste. It is, even if under the best of circumstances, with the best cleanup possible, which they need to do, no one should live there, rich or poor, of any color. And there really needs to be local, regional, state, and federal agencies working with residents and environmental justice and climate justice groups to develop an action plan to address the sea level rise threat to contamination sites, not just in Hunters Point, but all across San Francisco Bay Area. There are contamination sites all across the Bay. And Hunters Point just happens to be one of the most egregious, same with Treasure Island. But, from Vallejo, all Contra Costa, all over. And we, at one point a few years ago, got the California EPA to actually work with us to convene what was an incredible interagency, multi-agency, and community all-day workshop on this. And then what do you know? They stopped. And because I think their developer friends chimed in. So these are some of the broad recommendations. And then we can talk about, before we wrap up today, some next steps and how people can specifically get involved.
Great. Who's the right person to talk about next steps?
All right, Dalila, would you like to talk about next Tuesday, the We Can't Breathe event?
Yes. So Greenaction, in partner with many community organizations and organizations throughout San Francisco, are doing a Bayview Hunters Point We Can't Breathe Caravan Protest next Tuesday. We are gathering at Martin Luther King Park, or Bayview Park, on the corner of 3rd and Carroll. We ask that people come at 11 if they want to get situated and decorate their cars. We will be having a bit of a rally, and then we will get started caravanning at 12. So you are all welcome. Please come and support. We will be going from Bayview. We will be going past the Lennar Welcome Center, and we will be going to City Hall, to bring awareness to these issues, and also address the city, London Breed, about their negligence when it comes to this issue. So.
Yeah, and if I could just add that, it's really, the action is targeting San Francisco City Hall and the politicians in particular. And, earlier in the discussion, Pam mentioned how bad Trump's so-called EPA is, right? In a weird twist of things, believe it or not, as we speak, US EPA under Trump in San Francisco, and I'm shocked to say this, is actually holding the line better, not great, better than San Francisco City Hall on cleanup of the shipyard. That is a sad, sad commentary. And so we're targeting the systemic racism, the injustice, the fact that literally City Hall is promoting literally policies and practices that literally are taking away people's breath. And it's, it's just it's a different manifestation of the same government racism that killed George Floyd and so many others. And it's the same struggle, but here in, a city that proclaimed its solidarity, where government officials proclaim their solidarity with Black Lives Matter, they're promoting policies that are poisoning people of color and Black people and people of color in Bayview Hunters Point, threatening to displace and gentrify the community, and threatening people of all walks of life throughout the Bay Area. The other thing I'll just mention is that if you live in San Francisco, but even if you don't, you can contact not just Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris, but you can email Mayor Breed at mayorlondonbreed@sfgov.org and tell her, as a resident of the Bay Area, that you demand they carry out real testing of the shipyard site with independent community oversight and do a real cleanup and get that atomic bomb waste away from the waterfront. So I'd like to ask Pam and Dr. Sumchai to chime in.
Yeah.
Brandon, can you give us that that website again? I'm putting it in the chat.
Okay, London.
Or that.
The London Breed's email address is mayorlondonbreed, BREED, @sfgov.org.
I wanted to ask Dr. Sumchai to talk a little bit about, we have the radiation and the city is saying, oh, it's safe, right? But one of the things is it's a toxic stew with radiation and the synergy of it all. I mean, in terms of the toxicity of it all. I really want, if you could kind of elaborate on the interactions of that we haven't talked about. We don't know,
Yes, that's an excellent point that I was actually about to chime in on, the additive and cumulative impacts of having multiple potential toxic exposures in a population that is nutritionally deficient. Many times that's one of the things that we're also detecting on biomonitoring screenings, deficiencies in key nutrient elements that are essential for physical strength and integrity and immune function: iron, calcium, magnesium, zinc. The human immune system requires zinc. We see zinc deficiencies very, very commonly. So again, the majority of screenings that we have conducted identify multiple elements that are elevated. It's very, very rare, that you get screenings that only have one or two. There's some consistent elevations. The finding of elements that are potentially radioactive, of course, is unique. And then of the most dangerous elements that we're detecting, hands down, arsenic and thallium. To have someone with toxic levels of arsenic and the rat killing radionuclide thallium in their system. It just gives you a sense of, why we're seeing associated adverse health effects. One of the reasons why I didn't go into the biomonitoring program as a conventional hypothesis-driven research proposal is because I wasn't going to accept the null hypothesis that, people living next to the shipyard weren't exposed. I was going to accept that as a null hypothesis. I had studied the shipyard for 20 years. My dad had been a longshoreman. He, died of pulmonary asbestosis. I had seen patterns. Marie Harrison, had died of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis linked to, particle pollution. So there was no reason for me to say, as a researcher, I'm going to pretend that I don't think that people are exposed. What we're doing is more of a survey. We are detecting a lot of elements in a population that is extremely, disadvantaged, also from the, the social impacts. But I was looking at some PubMed articles today about aggregate analysis of multiple chemicals. And at some point it just, it's just chaos theory. You can't say for sure, but what we do have are epidemiological studies that are decades old from the 94124 zip code that compares it with like nearby Visitation Valley, compares it with the remainder of the city. We know that 94124 has the EPA's, highest particle pollution tonnage annually, along with incidences of childhood asthma, cardiopulmonary diseases, cancers that are linked to environmental exposures, metabolic diseases. So there is a picture of health disparities that support, exposure to environmental and maybe occupational, toxicants, and that is the foundation upon which, the biomonitoring program was established. Let me just make one quick point, dovetailing off of Delilah's excellent presentation about the air monitoring. What I think we're going to make news with and make changes, regulatory and political and social changes, when we compare biomonitoring with air monitoring. The California Biomonitoring Program has already moved in that direction, but one of my concerns that I've expressed to Bradley and Delilah is that we probably have a hilltop, Hunters Point hilltop asthma cluster, and if we get our air monitor up there and we're documenting exceedances, and someone who by a geospatial analysis lives within 50 feet of the air monitor and they have an asthma attack, and we do biomonitoring to detect soil elements like we've done, that's like bam, 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 bam. We're just in the area of cause and effect. It drives science, it drives environmental public health, and we're doing things again that are very, very vanguard here that can be models for other communities that are faced with this level of toxic onslaught, to be inspired by.
Okay, so thank you for that. We have 2 minutes before the end of the program, the scheduled part of the program. Mary Ruth, were there any juicy questions that maybe the speakers can address in their last 30 seconds each? You're muted, by the way.
Yes, possibly. There were a number of juicy questions, so I have to, but anyway, one was actually, what does cleanup look like? What do? Do you take it away? Do you cap it? Where does it go? Can you neutralize it? And how much would it cost? And government is a little more unstable in terms of where funds come from and the push to minimize taxes. How do we pay for it?
I'll just say really quick, where does it go is the $zillion question. And that's because in California, for example, there's now there were 3 hazardous waste landfills. And they're all, what a surprise, in Latino farmer communities. For radioactive waste, there's a site in the West Desert of Utah. We don't like any of these. What we do know, it has to be moved away from the waterfront, out of Bayview Hunters Point, and to a facility that's at least properly permitted with the least possible environmental justice impacts. In terms of cost, the fraud that was committed cost hundreds of millions of dollars of all of our money. And the government needs to just figure it out. They need to make Tetra Tech pay. But there's no easy answers.
Right.
And can I add to that is one is in terms of advocating the cleanup, we want the cleanup done the same way that they clean up in white communities, because there is a difference between what cleanup has looked like in communities of color and on Indian land and in white communities. It's very, very different. The other thing is no capping of it has to be cleaned up. It has to be taken away. The Marshall Islands, all of these places that have been capped, the concrete deteriorates. And right now, Marshall Island, the water level is rising, and the horror of the toxic waste going into the ocean because of that water. So no capping. Capping is out of the question. It has to be cleaned up in the same way they clean in white communities.
Okay, it's 8:30. Final 30 seconds. Dalila and Dr. Sumchai. Dalila. Final remarks about what can be done or should be done, or how people can have an impact.
Yes, I agree with no capping. There's also been history that capping, like Pam said, leaks, deteriorates over time. It absolutely needs to be cleaned up thoroughly. There needs to also be reestablished trust within the community. At this point, you know, agencies and the city have lost their trust in Bayview, and they haven't really worked to regain that trust. And I think that needs to be repaired and healed, just like the land needs to be repaired and healed.
Great. Thank you, Dalila.
Well, I directed an email to Vice President Al Gore in April, urging him to visit Bayview Hunters Point, because we are the choir, you know, singing his song. And this was in response to him being the first national figure to address the confluence of air pollution and COVID case rate incidences and the impact on, you know, minority urban industrialized communities, you know, like Hunters Point. And I invited him to come because I told him in the letter that we could prove, you know, what he was saying was true. The map of the COVID case rates in San Francisco and the map of the EPA, you know, designation of how much particle pollution, they almost exactly overlap. And we're also, of course, seeing associated diseases that are linked to exposure to particle pollution. So I am hoping that he will recognize that there is a role for him here, and people who have a natural affinity to, you know, the ideas that he is promoting. The other thing that I would leave with you is the power of toxic registries. Bradley talked about the legal actions that have been taken against Tetra Tech, against Lennar, City and County of San Francisco. The principal discharger at the Hunters Point Shipyard is the Navy. It always has been. The Navy is continuing to discharge and release at the shipyard via excavations of contaminated soil and discharging the landfill. The landfill has pockets of methane that can be as high as 50% in air. That's an explosive concentration, and the Navy discharges it and says they have a law to do that, and sent me a copy of the law. And along with that methane gas under pressure comes the volatilized contents of the landfill. That sets my hair on fire. But there are toxic registries. I used to work for the one in the VA system. It's the largest in the nation. There's the World Trade Center Health Program, where workers and responders post 9/11 who develop associated diseases after their massive exposures could be entered and undergo surveillance and monitoring and get healthcare benefits and recovery, and their kids and grandkids can be monitored. And I just discovered in reading that a toxic registry was established in Flint, Michigan, after all those kids were exposed to lead. So that's what we need in San Francisco. Congresswoman Barbara Lee has called for defunding the military to divert into domestic programs, and I did write her a letter. I also met with representatives of our future vice president about the shipyard and the biomonitoring, and the need for her to get the police officers out of building 606. I mean, that's a population that is clearly affected. But I think that's the direction that we need to move in, trying to get some of the $1 billion that the Navy has received in total in remediation back and establish it in a program that's a structured reparation and, offers a number of benefits, to people who are, clearly being exposed and clearly affected.
Okay, so I'm going to bring the program to a close. Clearly, there's way more that we could discuss here about what can be done and what the details are of the problem. I did my best in the chat to try to summarize the things that people mentioned that people can engage with. If you're not already a member of the Bay Area chapter of Climate Reality Project, I encourage you to join, because then you'll get notices of other panels like this, but also we're going to do our best to stay in contact with these folks and this campaign. And also, Bradley, the Greenaction website also has information about that campaign and how to get involved and how to support Greenaction.
Absolutely, greenaction.org, and people could also check out our Facebook and Instagram as well. Been very active, and we look forward to, thank you so much. We look forward to working with everybody.
Great. And then also we have two more, our next climate justice programs. We have a monthly climate justice chapter meeting. It's the last Wednesday of the month. So we're meeting next Wednesday from 6 to 7:30. So if you liked this program and have other ideas for how you want to be involved in the climate justice work of Climate Reality Project Bay Area chapter, please come join or reach out to me or my co-chair, Taryn. And also, Mary Ruth and I are co-facilitating a program Saturday, a week from Saturday, from 2 to 6 p.m. It's called Ending Racism to End the Climate Crisis. And it's a skills building trainer for facilitators where we're going to talk about tools and practice them around doing, building and ending racism work in our work as climate activists. Thank you everyone for joining and for your support. This program, we are working on an encore presentation of this program, potentially in partnership with the Commonwealth Club. So if you're a member and you're on our list, you'll get information about that as it comes to fruition. Speakers, if you could stay on the Zoom so we can do a debrief, and everyone, thank you for coming. Bye.